Well, welcome everyone to the Guardians of the Flame podcast. It's just brilliant to be doing a series of filmed podcasts for this latest season. We're really grateful for the Community Relations Council, who's kind of helping to fund these and help so we can make them get the quality as good as possible. And during the season, we're interviewing just a bunch of really interesting people, really gifted, kind of humans in their own respects, from musicians to activists to journalists. And it is a real privilege to be sitting here in the courtyard of Colum Sands and to be with you, Colum, in Rostrevor. For those of you from overseas, Rostrevor is a beautiful village right in the South County Down. We look over Carlingford Lough to what is politically the Republic of Ireland. And it's a beautiful scene. Behind the house here is an ancient oak forest, and that's become a kind of a scene for a lot of Colum's your current activism. And so it'd be good in this interview to talk about that and sure. Here. But many listening will have heard of the music of the Sands family and heard of your own music. And during this interview, we'd just love to kind of hear a bit more of your story, and especially for those who may not have, maybe from overseas, but half the people who listen to these podcasts come from somewhere else in the world. Of course, you have a big audience around the world, but for some of you listening, you may not have heard. Colum Sands is a brilliant musician, I suppose a poet, wordsmith, and an activist, and a good friend and a great human. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, Colum.
Thank you, Johnny. It's great to see you here and to be part of this series.
Yeah. So the Sands family are one of Ireland's best loved folk music bands. You sing everything from kind of incredibly humorous, kind of lighthearted music to nostalgic reflections on the past or youth, to more political contributions about the Troubles or reconciliation. There's so much breadth in the music as a family that you play and that you yourself play. I'd just love you to kind of start by reflecting on some of those early years for yourself growing up in a small village called Mayo Bridge. What was life like there, and how did life there contribute to the life that you now live as a musician? And
I'd say it's very important in informing how I turned out, or how I am turning out. Mayo Bridge is a small village. We were about 2 miles from there. Okay. So it's very quiet kind of road, small farms, and someone a couple of 100 yards away would be a close neighbour, So I remember first when people came to visit us from other countries, we'd always been telling them stories about our neighbours, and they saw that the house was fairly isolated, and they said, we don't see any neighbours around here at all. But so it's quite scattered at the time, but in other ways very close. Farming community, people helped each other out, and electricity wasn't around at the time, so there was a lot of entertainment was done live. People just came in, they probably didn't know it was entertainment, they just came in and did what they did. They told stories of what they'd been doing that day or what happened 100 years ago. They would mix in ghost stories, whatever seemed to be the right thing at that particular night. And there would often be songs thrown in as well. Both our parents played music. Father played the fiddle and my mother played a bit of accordion, but mostly they were into songs. And I suppose it's lovely to be on a program that's under the mantle of Guardians of the Flame, because in a way people at that time, the flame literally keeping the fire going, that was the difference between life and death in the winter, keeping that kind of flame going. There was also the kind of flame or the spirit within people in really tough times. We think we're living through hard times now, and we are in certain ways, but people at that time, just even to launch into a song, you know, and people did almost nothing money-wise, and it was a struggle, you know, as many people will know about that kind of thing today for different reasons. But just the whole idea that someone would feel like throwing back their head and singing a song, I always thought was a wonderful thing. Even then, you know, people that would come in and tell their story and sing their song, as the saying would go, past themselves. And that became very much the fabric of our lives growing up, and I think has always been a part of the whole family and mine, of our lives. And, you know, as a performer, traveling around, or even in any sphere of life, you have a story, you know, whether it's in music or in religion. You know, people, they want a story. Where did we come from? Where are we going to? And what's the best story around? Is your story the right one? Or could there be other stories that are pretty close, you know? So I've always been fascinated by that in my travels as a musician around the place. But yeah, just briefly, the answer is that was a very important time in my life, and still is.
Yeah. And I'm always struck by, when I'm around yourself or your sister Anne, the incredible knowledge of quantity of songs, of folk songs. Like, they just, in a way that I think nowadays we kind of seem to forget. But did you sing them so many times, or somehow those stories are kind of so in you that, like, I could talk to your sister and she'll remember some song from years and years ago?
Yes, songs have a wonderful way of embedding themselves within you. I'm not even sure if it's in the normal part of your memory. You know that way you have people who live to an age where they don't remember the names of their children. They don't even remember their own name, but they remember a song, which makes me believe that songs somehow enter us through another, and it's some kind of other way, and we store them in another way. It's maybe that whole thing of marrying a tune with words that often have been thought out very carefully. Even, I shouldn't say even, the old traditional songs are so beautifully created with a mindfulness towards, you know, vowels, consonants, rhymes. All of that makes a song into something very, very powerful that if it hasn't been written or performed sort of in a flippant way, it will stay with you.
Just kind of going back into the history of your family's music, when I've heard from your brother Tommy's perspective of how he was coming back from studying for the priesthood at one point, and kind of coming back and finding you, the rest of his family, in a van about to set off on a tour. What's your memory of why did you kind of get into it? It was your brother Ben and your late brother Dino and sister Anne, and then of course Tommy and yourself. What's your memories of how you started off and why you just...
Well, it was very much, first of all, just singing the way you would breathe almost. It was part of life, like you were singing when you were working in the fields and in the evenings and all of that. And then we were beginning to play, you know, there'd be these sessions in the house where people would drop in and sing, and you go to neighbours' houses. And we just got, I think we started off singing in local concerts and then moving out into bigger places. But I don't ever remember it being a planned thing. It seemed to just evolve. And like when there was a time where you'd be trying to phone people to organise concerts, and my brother Tommy did a lot of that, maybe nearly all of it. That meant jumping on a bike and riding 3 miles to the nearest phone box with your pocket full of pennies, you know, to try and pushing pennies into the
book a few concerts. And
it was amazing. And there'd be people who would come in cars, or, you know, with messages, will you come and play at this place or that place? We didn't have a phone. And so it evolved in that way. But I suppose the big step was when we entered a competition in Dublin, and the first prize was to play in New York for 3 weeks, and we won that. So that was a big step along the way for us.
It's kind of like an Ireland's Got Talent or something, or somehow you won. Yeah,
it was something. There were lots of those town competitions, as they called them at the time, and they still are. And it was good. You would see you might be competing against a juggler or a wrestler.
Right. Yeah,
there were all kinds of people turned up on those, and I suppose it is whoever did their thing with the most conviction, maybe conveyed a sense of fun and enjoyment, which we certainly had, apart from maybe being nervous at the whole idea of a competition. But yeah, that was how it kind of evolved from just singing around the fire or in neighbours' houses to playing on stages all over the world.
Wow. And then, of course, as you, as a family, started to play, it was the late 60s would have been when you started.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Troubles in Northern Ireland really started in 1969. So then that formed the kind of the backdrop of a lot of those years of touring and writing music and life. What's some of your memories of particularly those 70s, which were, really probably the worst years, I suppose, of the Troubles, with uncertainty and this kind of new normal of bombs and bomb scares, and what were some of your memories in terms of how that affected you all as a band?
It was a very difficult time for everyone, and just simple things in terms of music. Going out to play, you'll be stopped very often. Maybe all the instruments taken out of the car on a wet night and things like that. And then there was this kind of awkwardness that arose between neighbours, even in the same community, because one went one way on a Sunday and the other went another way, and they went to different schools and so on. The neighbours who lived across the kind of the march ditch, the dividing line from our farm and the next, they, as we say around here, they dug with the other foot. So although we went to different schools and different churches, we helped each other out in the things that farmers do, just planting and reaping crops and gathering in potatoes and stuff. I'll sing a bit of it. It's just a song called The March Ditch, which sort of looks back to those days. So the March Ditch, for people that don't know, it's that dividing line between two properties, and often a cause of great dispute at local level, just as a border might be at international level. I sat beside the march ditch when I was very small. I could hear the neighbours working in the field behind the wall. Farmers' children like ourselves, hungry mouths to feed. And spring was calling from the soil, it's time to sow the seeds. Spring was calling from the soil, it's time to sow the seeds. I played beside the march ditch when I was 4 or 5. A thrush told all the neighbours, it's good to be alive. The corn was shooting through the soil as we ran to and fro, and people working in the fields watched their children grow. People working in the fields watched their children grow. I worked beside the march ditch when I was 9 or 10, like the neighbours' children, home from school again. But if school days separated us because of different creeds, our orders now were all the same, it's time to pull the weeds. Our orders now were all the same, it's time to pull the weeds. And at 17 the march ditch heard me sing a song, turning hay on both sides now as the days were turning long. We had a break in August, theirs was in July, but when one drop of rain would fall, we'd all look at the sky. When one drop of rain would fall, we'd all look at the sky. I sat beside alive. My heart was feeling empty as the fields before my eyes. We'd heard it on the radio, another senseless death. But when it comes so close to home, it chills like winter's breath. When it comes so close to home, it chills like winter's breath. I look across the march ditch, and every day I see someone on the other side who looks a lot like me. To share this earth between us, how long does it need? But spring is calling from the soil, it's time to sow the seeds. Spring is calling from the soil, it's time to sow the seeds.
Marvelous. You took over the folk club, BBC Radio Ulster kind of radio program. So you've actually had a long history, really, in kind of working behind the microphone, interviewing others, and discovering music. Do you feel like when you kind of reflect on those years that there's good music being made, and there's kind of like, I sometimes feel like music is being dumbed down a wee bit nowadays, and are we still in an age where people can write songs that can really kind of open up the human condition and the soul? And
well, it's a very good question. I mean, songs are around for all kinds of reasons. I think of some of the songs, for example, that people would have been singing in our house when we were growing up. Be a song maybe in a love song, a song in celebration of place. There was a neighbour man used to come in, he was an ex-postman, and he used to sing, and the spirit in his singing, he didn't have a guitar or anything, he just found all the rhythm inside the words and the tune. And he had lost an arm in a threshing machine accident, and I'm sure his life wasn't easy, but he had this spirit around him, and he, although he had only one arm, he was a very good singer. He could sing better than some people with two arms. But he would just lash into a song. Sure as I went out one morning, all in the month of May, down by yon flowery garden I carelessly did. And you would take a drink then, and then you would continue, stray. I met a lovely damsel, and so on. There's that kind of singing. There's people singing funny songs, people taking fairly maybe ordinary songs and making them sound funny. Just lifting people's spirits. Songs have always been written to, express joy, sorrow. Folk songs, I think, have often carried the story of the folk and the time and the period they're living through. There are songs that are written to ensure that they're only 3 minutes, because some thought in radio production would think that unless you hear the presenter's voice every 3 minutes, the world will stop turning, and they mightn't play it. They might look at timings and decide whether the song is going to be played or not just by looking at the time. That's another kind of song. We march around supermarkets in time to music that's sort of thought out very carefully to calm you down, or maybe point you towards a particular shelf. There are so many forms of music, classical music as it's called as well, where there's a lot of thought has gone into arrangement and that kind of thing, and composition. But I do think it's really important to have songs that express the time we live in. Again, getting back to that idea of people telling their story, it's so important to tell your story and to have someone to listen to you telling your story, whether that's set to a tune or just somebody that needs to talk. Like at this particular time now, I'm sure, we're sitting here talking during the COVID time, and people aren't allowed to get together, and we're sitting quite a distance apart. And if you go out and meet people on the forest trails or on the street, they'll keep their distance. But people so much need to talk about what's happening to them. So the song is a very important form of doing that. And I think there could be far more songs written that take a fairly, take a thoughtful look at what is going on around us. Of course, you need funny songs and love songs and all of that. But, if you regard yourself as part of nature, of which we are. You know, we are part of nature, and nature is part of us. If, for example, that is under threat, then of course that is one thing that could be sung about, talked about. If there's a kind of virus like greed, which is causing people to put their own interests before everything else, you know, and only see opportunities of profit in every situation, in every part of nature, or in every situation like now, where, you know, there are people looking at the COVID time and seeing ways to make money out of that. That is part of human nature. But I think it's very important to try and keep some form of balance in that. We do need to make money to live, but when it becomes the most important thing, it can really disrupt other people's lives. That's an understatement, I'd say.
And so you're talking about storytelling. One of the things I mentioned in the documentary we made was our identities are what make us different. Our stories are what make us the same. And I think it does seem to be that really gifted folk musicians, and certainly when I've been to a Sands Family concert or when I've seen you play, the audience could be from different parts of the world. They could be from Protestant Catholic background or no faith whatsoever, but they can all sit there and laugh and maybe cry or resonate with the stories that you're singing about. And that is, I mean, that's a real gift that I think your family have. And I wonder, I suppose the other side of music and is not just the kind of the storytelling, but is that kind of stronger message. You could call it the prophetic tradition, or that kind of, you know, like a Pete Seeger, this machine kills fascists, or whatever he had written on his guitar. You know, he was very aware that he wasn't just telling a story, he was speaking a message that was, or was that Pete Seeger, or am I mixing? I'm
Willie Guthrie.
Willie Guthrie.
Yeah.
Willie Guthrie.
But anyway, I'm sure Pete said it as well.
Pete had, Sorry, that's the second kind of faux pas I've made this morning in interviews. But Woody Guthrie, and then Pete Seeger also, Where Have All the Flowers Gone, and it kind of it's storytelling, it's song, but it's speaking about something very significant and important, and quite often quite powerful. So the March Ditch song, you're telling a story, but you're somehow tapping into a real reality in a society that was kind of falling apart. Is there another example maybe of during those years or more recently where you've kind of written a song that kind of felt like you were just connecting to people's lives, but also saying something quite important that needed to be heard?
Well, sometimes you write songs that seem to last across quite a sphere of time, you know. Songs maybe written 20, 30, maybe more years ago seem to have become relevant again. There's so much confusion in the world at the moment, often deliberately generated. You know, I think people are very easy to control if they're confused or frightened. And people, there's this kind of helplessness sets in that situation, and people kind of get afraid even to say things, afraid to express their opinion. And I wrote a song about that way back in the 1970s, and it is built around an expression that's used here these days, or was used back in those days. Whatever you say nothing. And I remember we were touring with the Sands family, and we were in a Catholic area of Germany, and I wouldn't really have thought, you know, I don't go around thinking, is this a Catholic area or a Protestant area? But it was brought to our attention. It's a late night chat with the owner of an old kind of inn, and most of the customers had gone home, but he was interested in us because we had come from where we live here, you know. But he was quite nervous as a Protestant, because he was living in a Catholic area. And I remember he said, I suppose, you know, who I'm talking about if I say ML. And we didn't pick that up right away, you know. I said, no, Martin Luther. So I thought that's amazing. I can't remember how many 100 years ago that was since he had been around, but that someone felt he still had to whisper his name. And there was this whole thing here of people being afraid to speak their mind for one way, for one reason or another. So I wrote this song. Whatever you say nothing when you speak about you know what. For if you know who should hear you, you know what you'll get. They'll take you off to you know where, for you wouldn't know how long. So for you know who's sick, don't let anyone hear you singing this song. And you all know what I'm speaking of when I mention you know what. And it goes on like that, you know who, and so on. And I've been singing the song in all kinds of places, like in Berlin when there was still a wall there, in Jerusalem where there is a wall. And in the States during this is still kind of the Trump era, but earlier on as well, I remember people dropping their voices when they were talking about certain political things because they weren't sure who might be around. And so a song like that can kind of make fun of it and help people to laugh. I also love the power of cartoons, Someone can make a drawing, maybe put a couple of words on it, and you look at it and you say, yeah, that hits the nail on the head. So a song, I like a song, kind of cartoon type song that says something, makes you smile, and then kind of sets you thinking, about. And I was singing that just because I happen to be involved quite a lot in among a group who are trying to develop an interest in looking after nature, and especially protecting it from people who object to the laws that have been put in place to protect nature. I've found myself around high courts and things in recent times, and I did that with a few people from Extinction Rebellion, that song outside the courthouse in Belfast, because there's a kind of be very careful what you say in the court or what you say about the courts, and with good reason, of course. But if you have a situation like here, for example, this story that kind of brought me into a deeper level of looking at how nature and therefore us is being treated. Just a story of an invisible tree in the forest up here just behind us. It's a very old oak wood. It's been mapped like in 1602 as a very old wood even then. And ancient woodland has, carries forms of life that you won't get in newly planted woodland. And so a tree consultant, a doctor, he's a doctor, so this man would be respected. And he drew up a report, and sections of the forest appeared to go missing from the maps. And one particular tree, like he did a report for trees that actually were adjacent to the site. And he listed a few, but one particular tree, which wasn't only adjacent, it was actually overhanging the site, and therefore its roots would be underneath and its crown would be in the site. And that tree wasn't there. And it set me thinking, does this kind of thing happen a lot? This man, in a sense, he is a kind of guardian of nature. He is an expert on trees. He's studied trees for 40 years. If he's called in to identify trees, you have to believe that he recognizes an oak tree after 40 years experience, even specializing in broadleaf trees. And it's not there. So there's a very crude form of humor, a primal form of humor that's used in pantomime and circus. The clown comes out and there's somebody behind him that's about to jump on him, and he pretends he doesn't know they're there. Or in the pantomime, there's some threat behind the character in the center of the stage, and the audience starts shouting, he's behind you, and he says, oh no, he's not, oh yes, he is. And that's the cheapest laugh in town. So this is where you pretend you don't see something or pretend you don't know something. So to me, anyone in any form, whether it's as a consultant or in a courtroom, pretends not to see something that is there, or pretends to see something that isn't there. You know, it's. I think that is a form of clowning, and it's well worth a bit of humour.
Yeah.
So you know, you could make all kinds of serious speeches about it, or you could look for ways to tell the story again in another way through the power of song.
Yeah, and it almost is more powerful. You know, if you just simply report something, you can miss. You know, sometimes it's like a cartoonist in a newspaper. You know, a picture of America as a puppet master, and certain other countries kind of in proxy wars. You know, that cartoon graphically can picture something very true about kind of international relations, in a way that if you just report the fact of, such and such prime minister met another one and this happened and this, you're missing actually a deeper story. And I think it's the same way. You write a song about it, you're actually able to speak the truth in a way that we sometimes miss when it's right there in front of us.
Yeah, I think it's a great it's one of the great powers of song, and it makes it very enjoyable as something to listen to when someone kind of hits the nail on the head, or to sing, or to sing a song like Whatever You Say Nothing, but actually says nothing at all, but to see an audience nodding and smiling, and they know exactly what you mean. I love that. Kind of thing.
So, as we said at the beginning, we live in a very beautiful area, and in the last couple of years, you've really kind of got much more involved in, I think there's always been an involvement in environmental activism, but much more in the last couple of years, particularly focused on Rostrevor. So, years ago, Joni Mitchell said, "You don't know what you've got till it's gone." They paved paradise, put up a parking lot, and it did seem like it could still be a scenario where in a beautiful village like this with an ancient oak wood, a place that C.S. Lewis said inspired him to write Narnia, the Narnia books, that we could be looking at underground car parks and inner city developments, and you were talking about the plans that were drawn up, and an oak tree was just missing. It wasn't there, and then you actually kind of made it was like you saw the symbolism of an invisible tree, because it kind of it showed a lot more about the wider kind of principle of what was happening. Things were being overlooked, and then the invisible tree became the tree of the year. Is that what happened?
Yeah, it was. Lots of people got involved in this and mentioned cartoons. Cartoonists and painters and so on, and came up with some fantastic paintings. People started to visit the tree, and there is something about, something really sinister about denying the existence of a life, whether it's a tree or a person. And so you could say it's a form of gaslighting. This fairly new word, which is the process of trying to persuade someone that what isn't true is true. And so people from all over the world came to the tree, and they stood beside the tree, and they looked at it and they touched it, and they said, "This is an oak tree." I heard all kinds of, I've heard it in 17 different languages, from Rwanda, Holland, Mexico, of course in Irish. And it's almost like, in that sense, I think nature could be compared to religion, because everyone looked at this thing that we in English call an oak tree, or dar in Irish, which gives, the origin to so many place names like Derry and Ardara and Kildare and so on. But people just come and they say, yeah, it's here. So that is a message going back to the person who said it isn't there. It also is reassurance, because you start, if a doctor puts his name to something, you start to think, am I seeing things? Is that tree really there? So it's very reassuring when people come and touch it and say, this tree is here. So that, the Woodland Trust have a competition each year for the tree of the year. And a few people said to us, why don't you nominate the tree for the Tree of the Year award? And it won. And the fact that a man came to the door here behind me one morning with very expensive cameras dangling around his neck, and he said, I've come to take a photograph of the invisible tree. Could you show me where it is? In that instant, I realized what a bizarre situation we were challenging, and showing also the comical side of it, that these kind of consultants and so on will, really risk their integrity completely by signing their name to something, I suppose, for financial persuasion. I don't know why they do it, but I don't even care why they do it. The main thing is to assert the existence of that which is being denied. So that is a fascinating story, and we did other things to kind of emphasize the existence of the tree. We collected oak galls from the tree, and we used a very ancient process of making ink that was used to write the Magna Carta, which is the closest thing there is to a written constitution in these parts. And then it was used as well for writing the Book of Kells, for example, this ink. So you take the oak galls, you crush them up, you boil them with something like iron, like rusty nails, and it turns this beautiful black ink. And then you can add in honey to help it to flow. And at a concert one night in Ancoan, people came and they signed their names with this oak ink, just saying that this was ink from the tree. We have taken the case of the tree to the courts, lost a judicial review, but are now trying to communicate with the Minister for Justice and the Lord Chief Justice. And we have written a poem, a letter, and made a short film. And Miriam has written this up in calligraphy in the form of a scroll. So we have asked the Lord Chief Justice for permission to present the scroll to him, written in oak ink. And it's telling the story of many things, including the invisible tree, and also how in the courts legal people could see things which weren't there, and couldn't see things which were there. And that's all written in the form of a poem, which can be seen on a website called Environmental Justice Network Ireland, ejni.org.
Okay.
And it's called Rhyme for Justice with a question mark after it. So,
brilliant. And so you're really then touching on this bigger question of environmentalism, the world we live in, the climate, and it shouldn't really be a battleground of is it true or not, but it seems in some parts, and certainly Donald Trump and many in America have kind of used a belief in climate science as a litmus test for whether you're somehow some kind of lost hippie or more truthful conservative, and it just seems like truth is being lost in that whole thing, and all the while we as humans are living on a planet that is losing its kind of a soul, losing its the climate is warming, species are dying out, and I suppose one of the things that we try to cover on this series is looking at brokenness in the world, divided societies and conflict. But the environment is one of these areas that maybe is more broken than anything. And maybe the reason is not because of necessarily a religious belief or a particular tribal belief. It's because of profit. We want more money, and therefore it's conducive to cut down that forest to get such and such out of it. And so I'm very kind of been brilliant to see your work beginning to evolve more and more in that field, and developing a movement from these parts of people to kind of really be activists for small level unjust developments like we're seeing here, or the bigger levels of Amazon forests and Great Barrier Reefs and climate change.
Yeah, I think just picking up on a couple of things you said, like even the term environmentalist is a strange one. The term environment is a very cold term, I think. If you say nature, if you talk about a hedge with birds singing in it, or a field of barley waving in the wind, you can imagine nature. If you say environment, or I say it either, it doesn't do much for me. There's also that suggestion, I suppose, in what you were musing on there, that environmentalists can be seen as hippies, and an environmentalist is someone who cares for nature around them. And if you ask yourself, what is the environment? I think Einstein's answer to that was, it's everything that isn't me. So you are part of my environment, I am part of yours. And I had the occasion to do an interview recently with Edwin Poots, who's the Minister for Agricultural, Rural Affairs and the Environment. Now, you wouldn't regard him as a hippie. And I whatever a hippie is. But anyway, I thought at the beginning of the interview I'd establish, with that Cambridge English dictionary definition, someone who cares about the environment or works for its protection. I said, would you define yourself as an environmentalist? And he said, yeah, I would. How could anyone not be an environmentalist? I mean, we're 60% water. If we stop breathing this air around us for 3 minutes, we're not here. Like we're going the way the oak leaves are going into the ground, and we're still part of the environment, but not in the form where we can sit up in a chair and have a conversation. So I think that taking the coldness out of the word environment is really important, to see it more as nature, to see it as us. To damage the environment is to sit on the branch of a tree and saw it at the end towards the tree. If you happen to be heavily invested in, if you happen to be heavily invested, say, have heavy investment in oil, you will argue, you'll spend millions of pounds saying it's a good idea to keep bringing oil up out of the ground or coal up out of the ground. If you have lots of investment in arms, peace is not good news. So as you mentioned, the whole prophet thing, that is crucial, and it's just somehow getting people connected to nature again. In maybe there's never been a better year than this one for that. You go out and you meet people on the roads and the trails around Rostrevor here, and they all stop to talk about how beautiful it is and how important it is. A town like Newry, which has been trying very hard to get a green space area in it. I don't know how the vast number of acres of car parking spaces in Newry already, and the council are trying to push in the idea of more car parks and more office buildings and so on. And in a year when the whole idea of offices is being challenged, people are working from home and so on. I think that's a very interesting thing, and I think there are lots of signs that young people are much more aware of this than people of my age, and that gives me great hope. But the group here in Rostrevor, Rostrevor Action Respecting Our Environment, in that letter I mentioned to the Lord Chief Justice and the Minister for Justice, there are 25 people involved in that, aged from 9 to 92, and I think that's a very good sign that this has been recognised as being important across all ages. And
if people listening, they can also find some of more information. There's a Facebook group, Rare Rostrevor Action Respecting the Environment.
Rare is only one of the many groups. It's impossible to look at one, again, to use that word, environmental case, a local one, and not see how all of that connects to other places. So there are environmental groups all over the world, but growing numbers here. And when there's any sign, I suppose, that our elected representatives are answering to the needs of the corporate rather than the electorate, I think that people catch on to that very fast. And just a year ago, health workers were taken to the streets in the rain, trying to get Stormont out of the self-furlough period of 3 years, which it had been in, just to get back and do some work. So I think there is a change. The march ditch, the old orange-green things here, which were so important and still are to some extent, I believe they will be replaced by a recognition of the fact that we really need to start looking after nature. We don't want to drink orange water or green water, or breathe orange air or green air. We want clean air, clean water, safe soil. And I think if we put more and more energy into that, this already beautiful country would become even more beautiful and even more special.
It was Desmond Tutu used the phrase Ubuntu. Is it a Zulu phrase? I'm not sure, but it connects to this idea in South Africa and much of Africa that I am because you are, the interconnectedness of us. Mother Teresa said, if there's conflict, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. You know, this sense of what you're talking about is connection and our belonging to each other, and what happens to me affects you, and vice versa. But beyond just people, also everything that's out there, our world that we live in, the environment. And you've got your latest album. Is Songbridge, that's the name of
yes.
it? Yes. Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about some of what inspired that? I mean, obviously it's coming out of a lot of these stories and bridges and connecting. And
yes. There's the idea of bridges, building bridges with songs and stories, and connecting people across the miles and across the generations. And the title track Songbridge, which I don't think I could play it right now because it's bit nippy on the fingers here, but I wrote it around this guitar, which is a guitar I saw in a photograph which was taken in 1920, and it found its way into my hands because it belonged to the grandparents of Barbara, who's my wife, and this guitar belonged to them. They took a stand against the Nazi idea in Germany, and they paid for it, but they tried. And the guitar lives on to sing songs across the generations and across the miles. So it's a beautiful old guitar. So there's that idea in it, but there's also the idea in many of the songs into just reconnecting people to nature and seeing the importance of taking care of it, and in doing so taking care of each other and all life around us. So that's quite a big part. Maybe one of the songs on it, if I can
it is
move
quite
my
cold.
fingers.
We're sitting in fairly nippy weather, so your fingers may not be working so well.
It's like, I think there are various processes that can happen to people. If you look at a child, when they're born, they start going out and around the world, they're asking questions, they're full of wonder, they open every cupboard in the kitchen to see what's in there. You know, when you get a bit older, you wouldn't do that because you think you know what's in there, even though there might be stuff you don't know about. But I love the way children open things and ask questions. And then that sense of wonder and curiosity can be kind of knocked out of them by life. And I think that's a very sad thing. Or if people don't feel they're been given a voice, they may become angry, they may become helpless, they may even become indifferent. And I think when apathy sets in, that's when hope is really being challenged. So I wrote this song to challenge that, to move, try to move people. And of course, as any songwriter would say, you're not preaching to other people, you're often writing the song to remind yourself how important this is, what you're saying in the song. But I thought I'd write the song around the idea of a yawn, you know, when people are just fed up and they go, oh. Sure, that's the way it goes. Yeah. Do you know? You wouldn't know. When I was young, I heard them say, no use in talking anyway. Sure, no one's gonna listen, they would say. Well, maybe this was right or wrong, or just another way to yawn. But words like this will never light our way. Oh, sure, that's the way it goes. Oh, do you know you wouldn't know? I went to school a little while, the books were tame, the teachers wild. Teacher strikes were different in those days. But some were good, I'm glad to say, their memories with me to this day. It's better asking questions than to say, oh, sure, that's the way it goes. Oh, Do you know you wouldn't know? So take a chance and try. Indifference is the reason why the profiteers have racked so much today, the racketeers. They'll sell you weapons, sell you death, they'd even sell their Mother Earth. How happy they must be to hear us say, sure that's the way it goes. Do you know you wouldn't know? So Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Jew, and all those words from me and you that seem to come between us every day. Divided in theology, united in our apathy, and nothing ever changes while we say, sure that's the way it goes. Do you know you wouldn't know? Your vote and use it well. Don't waste it on some empty shell without the vision or the voice to say, there's more to life than buy and sell this precious earth. Protect it well. Our children will not thank us if we say, sure that's the way it goes. Do you know you wouldn't know?
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah. Very good. Colum, we're just kind of coming to the end of our conversation. We could talk a lot about a lot of things. What strikes me about you and your work, and even listen to that song, you're writing about apathy, and it's a call to, not a call to arms, but a call to activism and getting involved. What are some ways that you feel we can get involved? I think for me, sometimes you touched on before the word environmentalism and hippies, and this kind of way that working for our environment can seem like an unobtainable or something that's not really, it's difficult for people. How do you feel we can start to become, as a society or as individuals, really just more animated by what's going on and activated and move beyond apathy into kind of taking steps? What steps should we take?
Well, I think getting involved in your own mind is the most important thing. It's very easy to say, like, why does the Green Party or that environmental fella down the road or that councillor not do something? People have to take this on board as being like it's vital in the real meaning of that word. It's of vital importance that we protect the life systems around us. If there are a small group of people who are putting their profits first, they have to be challenged and exposed and hopefully coaxed into another way of looking at the world. It's very difficult because we all, well, speaking for myself, I have been traveling all over the world. It's not a very sustainable kind of thing to do. Driving around in the car, which I'm very glad I have a car. I spent the first 15 years of my life walking everywhere or borrowing bicycles and things. I mean, it's not like a whole change, but it's maybe just changing the small things. Maybe walk a bit more often than drive if you're able to walk and so on. But just seeing that bigger picture, that we all belong to something that is much bigger than us, and our little concerns about how to turn everything around us into profit, we have to question that in our own, in our own hearts, I think. And just listen to those children that are going onto the streets and trying to get grown-ups to act like adults, you might say. That kind of campaigning can lead to a sort of desperation, and people take extreme measures to try to draw attention to this. Sometimes the measures themselves can make people think these people are all mad. You know, like for example, in the Houses of Parliament, some people glued themselves to the viewing gallery without all that many clothes on them, if any, apart from a tube of glue. But whatever way the attention is going to be drawn, I think it has to be done, and we all can play a part in that. We do elect people to speak for us at local level and at higher level as well. Just to have conversations with those people, and bearing in mind that they will have these objectors. I call them objectors, the people who object to the laws that are put in place to protect the environment. They will have those people in their ears, you know. Could you work this for us? Could we build? I mean, we need to build houses, of course. People need to find houses to live in, but I'm talking more about the person who's thinking of building for the sake of building, and there's a kind of epidemic of concrete diarrhea, I might call it, where they're pouring concrete all over the place. Not always needed, often it is, but not always. And again, if you're all set up to do a lot of building, you'll want to keep building. If you're set up for, as I said earlier, selling weapons, you need people fighting. It's very clearly to be seen in America, where the power of the arms, the Rifle Association and all that. But yeah, just think about it, talk to children, listen to children, and just go and have a look at what's going on. We live in a world of wonder, and each one of us is a wonder within that world.
Well, Colum Sands, thanks so much for taking time to talk and sing songs. There's so many more. You've mentioned a couple of websites that people can visit. Your own website, to buy your music, it's on your own website, is
yes,
that? What's
just
that?
my name, Colum Sands.
COLUM Sands.com.
And you can find the music there. You can, if you're into the CDs, you can buy them there, or you can download the music as well, if that's your preference.
CDs, I've heard of them. Those old-fashioned
They're very
things.
quaint and very wonderful. I still prefer them to the compressed music that we download, but it's whatever people want.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Colum, thanks so much. You're a great neighbour and a good friend. Thanks for your time.
Great to meet you here today, Johnny. Thank you.
Yeah.